We're out here in Mesopotamia for a commentary on the Babylon campaign in Total War Pharaoh Dynasties, not to be confused with Total War Pharaoh, which is technically a different game in that it adds a load of stuff. So maybe they were generously letting players go back to the smaller Pharaoh experience if they preferred it. And indeed, there is something to be said for that, because as we go through the game in this video and look at the highlights of the campaign, you'll probably notice that we're going to barely cover even half of the game world. Total War Pharaoh Dynasties is absolutely massive. But actually, before I give you my little rant on that topic, I shall introduce some of this early gameplay a little. As usual, you start your Total War campaign at war with someone who has already got an army hovering near you, with the clear intention that you're meant to dive right into the combat. So you'll see me carrying out a war with our western neighbours. I say western, the map orientation isn't north-facing, but for simplicity, let's pretend that it is. I'll be heading right to their settlement, brackets heading to my left, sieging them and fighting them. And broadly speaking, that's the best opening move in every Total War. It's a positive feedback loop game. The most important battle you fight is always going to be the first one, the most important turn is the first one, and basically, you need to play as liberally, as hard as possible, trying to claim a new settlement ASAP, at any cost. And if you're not familiar with my commentaries, I'll be talking about the specifics of gameplay here and there, and strategies and such, but also going off on rants, usually about game design, and I do like to start off my videos with such a rant, in order to scare off the normal people. So let's return to that comment on the map I just made. It's really, really big. And that's pretty cool, where have I heard that before, and so on. We won't actually be seeing it in this video, but just know that we're here in Iraq basically, but if I wanted, I could go and conquer all the way to Greece and all the islands over there and such. You can make a very big empire with very many cities. There's no point in doing this, and I think it would be very boring and very easy to do, because the game gets easier and easier as it goes on in the usual empire builder positive feedback loop sort of way. However, that's certainly a theoretical step forward over Total War Pharaoh OG Edition. Basically, Mesopotamia and Greece, the west and east parts of the map, weren't there in the original, so that's the big change you get if you play Dynasties instead. The victory conditions for Babylon don't require you to leave Mesopotamia, so I won't. But you know, I'm hand-wavingly indicating gratitude for this change, but I suppose it can't be escaped that technically it doesn't matter, because it's not really integrated into any given campaign. It's more like if you wanted to replay the game, you could play on an entirely new map for all intents and purposes, as in if I now switched to playing as the Greeks, I would see a new map, see new enemies that I didn't see any of while playing as the Babylonians, so it's like an entirely new experience, it's got that there. However, this doesn't really matter or add anything to the game at all, like that's going to be my thesis to start undoing my praise, and it comes back to the map itself, really. The map is the setting of the core campaign gameplay, but it doesn't really matter very much. It's a big, beautiful open world, if you like, in a game with no open world mechanics. So if the game suddenly changed so that the only parts of the map that were there were the shortest routes between all the settlements, the game would be the same, because those are the only places the game entities mechanically quote-unquote can go. What am I getting at here? I think the campaign map gameplay needs an overhaul to make your kingdom, your lands, part of the game. As it stands, your territory is an abstraction because all of the economic functions take place in settlements. The rest of it is mainly there, so that when you zoom out, it looks like you have something other than the occasional settlement. Mechanically though, you don't. Although as hinted at, this problem, at the current time in the Total War story, is less bad than it's ever been. I said something to this effect in my original Total War Pharaoh video, and I think it does need to be repeated. Total War Pharaoh is the most mechanically deep, most creative, most professional, just overall best Total War Rome 2-like that exists. A lot of the problems I'm going to be talking about are less bad than they've been in a long time. I'm just going to talk about them anyway for the sake of it, basically. The number of bells, whistles, considerations, things to do outside of battle, economic choices, it's more than ever before, and I'll highlight some of these aspects as we go on. For now, I'll just make the claim that they are there. More than ever, you really can do strategic things that aren't just attack the nearest settlement. Although of course, you still need to attack the nearest settlement at all times, because fundamentally that's just what the game is. And that might invalidate all their efforts and render them fruitless, which is what I began to think when I was playing the OG Total War Pharaoh. Total War Rome 2 likes are a 4x game where one of the X's is way bigger than the rest, and there is no non-war strategy in Total War. Well, I guess that checks out with the title. That distinction of me calling things Total War Rome 2 likes is very important, because as I understand it, the legacy of Total War Rome 2 is the reason why the desire to improve on the formula that exists at Creative Assembly isn't being acted on, or perhaps simply can't be acted on. All the games Rome 2 onwards in the Total War series are quote-unquote the same, in that they are the same fundamental game with different other sideshows attached on top, although ignoring those sideshows and sticking to the fundamental game remains not just possible, perhaps even optimal. And I suspect there are designers at Creative Assembly who wish they could do something different, gameplay-wise, but rumour has it the way that this fundamental Rome 2-like basic game building block is coded means it can't really be changed without stopping development for a long time, and therefore it probably won't be changed. I want to extend my benefit of the doubt, because in this video I'm going to be doing things like pointing out some new mechanic and going, this amazing bells and whistles type feature they added is ultimately pointless because the fundamental game needs a sequel. Like, there needs to be a paradigm shift in what the game is at this late stage, like in the progression of the franchise. We need a breakthrough, it needs to go somewhere, and everything else doesn't matter very much. I think they know this. It's only because there are business concerns, technical concerns, that mean the best path for them remains to make a spread of 4 building settlements that spawn infinitely regenerating 20-unit armies that slap each other to death, the game. And then you graft billions of modifiers and text adventures and loot drops and character leveling and whatever else you want to take from any other game genre on top of that infinitely regenerating 20-unit army slapping a 4 building settlement 30 times and then the game ends formula of Total War Rome 2 onwards. If you want to know what that formula actually looks like in any of those games, well, we'll be seeing it in this video, of course, along with perhaps more evidence of all that good stuff added to the formula over the years, not really changing things up. Even though it's the best they've done with it thus far, Total War Pharaoh Dynasties is still the most bells and whistles Total War Rome 2 like. It's the best one because of that. Is that a good thing? I don't know. It's only that Total War veterans like me are going to just be eternally disappointed that the franchise isn't going anywhere interesting, or like doing anything new mechanically. The battles aren't getting bigger, the immersion or realism has probably only gotten worse over time. Any sense of tension in the game is always dissolved by the infinite nature of your armies and resources. It's just unepic, which is what old heads like me see as the antithesis of the epicness of seeing armies in battle for the first time in video games back in the day, and wondering where this strand of video gaming was going. Well, nowhere. Like, Rome Total War 2 was the end of the road as it turned out, and that wasn't very different to what came before. Like, maybe even Shogun 2 was the end of the road. Wow, wow, wow. I'm still mad about something that happened 10 years ago. You're watching OVD's Game Grounds. Now we're going to refocus and do something very special. We're going to look at some actual gameplay until the next thing sets me off. We've won our first war. There was a battle back there with the traditional glitch-esque move of having the reinforced spawn point be marked wildly incorrectly, but let's not go there now. Basically, we did that. What shall we do now? What shall be our ambition, you might say, as here is one of the many bells and whistles which will be happening throughout the campaign. Your ambition choices. These are quests you voluntarily take on to get rewards, and in my experience, there was always an option to take one that was aligned with what I was about to do anyway, or even one you've already met the requirements for. So I got all the ambitions done pretty comfortably, and that was that. What I don't know is whether this explicitly does anything outside of giving you currency rewards. It's the kind of distinction where you can take this with any bell or whistle and just note how tangential it is. To put it another way, I think my concern is that if you're going to add some thematic mechanic, like an ambition system, you have to make the game about that in some way for it to really land. We need focus and purpose and other hand-wavy terms. This is hard to explain, and I think there are better bells and whistles to use as the core for that rant that's growing there, brewing like a storm in the distance, so let's leave that for now. I need to go and take a particular settlement next to complete the province that our previous war forced me to start conquering. I always disliked the complete the province style approach introduced in Rome 2, because I want what the provinces are to be a mechanic in itself. If everything even needs to be part of a province at all, and indeed in this game Babylon, our capital, is independent. It's technically in a province, but a province of one, so the province mechanics don't do anything. This actually sucks mechanically because so many buildings are based around the idea of being in a province system where they interact with other buildings in other settlements, that if you have independent places, you aren't going to get as much out of quite a lot of the building choices you have. Well anyway, I will get particular benefits from taking this settlement next. Therefore it's time for war with whoever these guys are. As for who they actually are, I'll save that rant for later. I also tried and failed a classic Total War exploit that existed even before Rome 2. If you send one guy to technically initiate a siege, the besieged forces can't fight in battles outside the city, then you can use your main army to try and start a battle outside the city with the defenders' other armies, like their supporting armies, to make things easier. It didn't work this time, maybe we'll find a better example later. But yes, that's why I have one general on his own, in case you were wondering. For shenanigans purposes, we end up fighting normally because the guys all just swarm in for a defensive battle. So let's do it. They have changed how battles work in Dynasties versus regular Pharaoh, in a way that will be hard to notice to the casual eye. But I think, in my God-given opinion, they actually made the problems of Total War combat in the Rome 2 era onwards a bit worse, and that's going to be another rant I'll save for later on. The enemy also had a general walking around on his own like me, so there's a brief pre-battle where we kill this guy in the corner because the AI doesn't link up their forces very well. In Total War Pharaoh, the main concern in battles is going to be mobility, because the Bronze Age theme means there's a heavy emphasis on infantry. The issue is that the Total War battle gameplay leans away from focusing on infantry, as their role, gameplay-wise, mechanically, is to be the anvil. Like, they go and engage in battle, and then you forget about them. So in terms of like player inputs, mechanics, you stop interacting with that part of your army once it begins doing its role. You need something else to do. They're just going to grind away doing some algorithmically inscrutable combat calculations. You're not involved in that. Your gameplay inputs need to go elsewhere, and Pharaoh tends to lack that elsewhere compared to other Total War games. That being a unit that's always able to receive orders and move around and do the player's stuff. Usually that's cavalry. Babylon actually gets cavalry units, so we'll see a few here and there, but really, you're going to be limited to chariots, which can be used in a similar way, but worse, essentially. That way being taking out all of the light infantry and skirmishers and then doing rear attacks. Like, that's what the player does in Total War battles. Due to the limited numbers of such units, I'm usually going to be taking some of my infantry and using them as cavalry tactically. And it works out in a similar way, I guess. It's just less swift and satisfying, so it's just a bit worse than it used to be, essentially, while still broadly being the same. I feel the army meta is leaning towards having a core line that focuses on defense, so that it survives long enough for you to do maneuver tactics with potentially quite slow and unmaneuverable units. Therefore, staying power matters more than in other Total War games, and we'll look into what I mean by staying power later. For this battle, you can get the general idea of how things go. You clear out the back lines, and as long as something can close in on the back of the front lines, that should inflict the morale debuffs you need to win the general brawl that usually breaks out, even if you were losing it up to that point. I should note that I'm playing on hard difficulty, and as ever, the off-ED grand theory of difficulty comes down like a hammer, because the game does not tell you what the difficulty levels do. Although I think it does give you a hint this time in the campaign setup menu. It says like enemies are stronger, something like that. And while that's the bare minimum, Total War games used to not even tell you that, so it is a step forward. But yes, I think it should tell you specifically what it does, and I know the reason it doesn't is because the more you make it obvious the AI is cheating, the less interesting that feels as a difficulty mode. And all I can say there is the L must be taken. Like, usually difficulty will just take a couple of stats on each unit and then add a flat amount to them, the amount depending on the specific difficulty level. And that will blow up the Byzantine balancing act between the 20 interdependent stats of a unit in such a way that really nobody knows what's going to happen. All we can say for sure is that on hard and above, one-on-one fights between the same units will have strings pulled such that the AI wins, and you'll need to apply some surround debuffs or use ranged attacks to get over that. Ranged combat might not be affected by difficulty level. Usually it isn't in most Total Wars, as in the buffs are on melee attacks specifically, like that being part of some unknown formula calculating the probability of landing a hit in combat, not actual attack values. Never, ever attempt to understand how Total War combat actually works, okay? Move your blob behind their blob. The AI will almost never notice you doing this or stop you from doing this, and you'll get unknown advantages for doing rear attacks, and that's usually enough. I'll be back for a closer, more horrifying look at how combat actually works later in this video, no doubt. And yeah, we win. We probably lost some guys in the fight, but if you don't know, your troops regenerate infinitely, so losses don't really matter, outside of rare circumstances. We'll see if any of those come up, and this is part of the unepic feeling I mentioned, like your armies are robots that grow on trees, so you don't have to worry about them. And I will be deliberately doing things that incur massive losses for me, because it saves me time in real life. It's just going to be a pro and con of the game. I'll probably have some thoughts on it. We need to auto-resolve the settlement after that previous battle, and I thought I would mention the post-capture choices. It's the usual Rome 2 onwards ones, and I think I might have the usual Rome 2 onwards problem with that, which is that occupy is the correct answer 99% of the time. I feel like one of the recent Total Wars fixed that by massively increasing the benefits of looting. Maybe it was even Total War Pharaoh, I forget, but generally, if you loot a settlement, you get a bit of money and a load of penalties, but then you also get given the repair bill, which usually will be more than what you got in loot, but you pay it a bit later, so that's the deal. You're like taking a loan from the environment, essentially. And it's a trap. That's the problem. It's only good if your intention in capturing something is to leave immediately and let it rebel without profiting from its buildings. And if you're doing that, something has already gone wrong, because you shouldn't be committing your army's resources to doing something like that that doesn't give you any long-term advantage. Like, the point of the game is to occupy settlements. So I will always occupy everything, which also, by the way, gives you a load of loot already in this game, because winning any battle gives you a round of loot, without any of the downsides attached, so looting the settlements just seems like a real mistake. As for sacking and razing, the other options, those are ones that give you more resources, but you don't get the settlement, in which case, well, again, go and check your victory conditions. You are actually supposed to take the settlements. Like, the resources you spend putting an army into the field way exceed what you get from sacking a settlement. So if you just want resources and you don't want to progress the game, just disband your army. I feel like sacking and razing, they need a rethink in some way. They need to do something very different, even if that's just like multiply the amount of stuff it gives you by 10, by 100, so it's really worth the loss you take in doing that, the sort of meta loss of not playing the game and making back progress and paying for the privilege just to click this button that doesn't really do very much. I think I'd actually be fine here and not say anything at all, if only the other buttons that weren't occupy were a bit smaller, just to make it clear they aren't really part of the game's progression. You're not supposed to be doing them. They're always last resort options. Occupy is the real choice. I'd even prefer them to actually be options outside of those battle results. So you occupy something by default, then you'd have a button which allows you to raise or sack any settlement with your troops in it at any time, whether or not you just took it. That way you'd be doing things at your leisure, you'd get some utility out of it, some strategy out of it. It's better UX, it's more freedom, chef's kiss. I think Total War Attila kind of lets you do this thing I'm requesting now, as I recall. And I don't like Total War Attila, so there you go, heartbreaking. The worst Total War you know has a great mechanic. Well, we're getting into the sort of mindless ranting I promised myself I would stop making, so let's just move on. I'll briefly mention the choices for what units I had in my army. More specifically mentioning why I'm not mentioning it. In the early game, just recruiting anything is all that matters, and recruiting as much as you possibly can. Gradually, I will be leaning towards that defensive build I mentioned, but yes, I didn't look at any of the stats of the units or even their names or anything. I was just putting meat in the seats at first, so I'm not going to talk about units specifically yet. Here's the next bell and or whistle, Royal Commands. I'll be perfectly honest here, I completely forgot this mechanic existed and I never used it. This isn't so bad because it comes with a built-in bonus for those who don't remember it, so I'm absolutely rescued by the game design here. The Royal Command is a certain buff you get based on faction and maybe even the particular ruler of the faction and some other stats of that ruler like their legitimacy or something, I forget exactly. But it's something you trigger manually on a cooldown to get some buff in the game world. Usually though, if you don't trigger it for long enough, you get a passive buff as a reward for not using it. And I'll be getting that for the whole campaign, of course. The one I get in this campaign is actually really good. It adds units to a global recruitment pool over time, like every 6 turns or something. Meaning you can recruit units outside of regions with recruitment buildings, and I think you can even recruit them instantly, like without your movement being cancelled. Normally recruiting ends your turn's movement and doesn't resolve until the next turn. So yeah, I say I forgot about this mechanic. With a passive that good, maybe I saw it and just checked out because I wanted to build as much global recruitment as I could. And I do remember recruiting everything that went into the global recruitment pool because of this. It's really useful. That war I got into earlier is over, by the way, thanks to our victory in that battle. So let's move on to the next goal, which was to move south. I am 1 region away from the local map edge, so it's useful for me to get that edge under control so I can ignore it. It's not so cut and dry in Total War Pharaoh actually, because enemies do attack you from off-map in this game. Although when this happened to me, it somehow didn't cause any problems and felt like it was glitched, so we'll look at that later on. Basically, these guys down here, they have to be attacked, whoever they are. Now, they've brought an army to contest this siege I started, and the battle is probably winnable. However, I don't really want to fight a battle like this, and that's a core feature of my strategic thinking, avoiding battles because of the principle that I like to bring up in Total War games, which is pace breaking, that's what I call it. The flow of gameplay on the campaign map is so involved that when it's broken by a battle, there is potential for that to be a net negative, even if the battle is its own flow of interesting gameplay. So I generally fight battles I think I need to fight, and here we can withdraw from battle to avoid having the city garrison be involved. It looks like the enemy used all their movement to make that challenge, because in the next turn they're still standing nearby. So I can go fight their army separately in a crushing auto-resolve and then go back to the siege. This is a worse strategy because I could have already taken the city if that battle went really well, or at least skipped a turn of siege, and losses taken in battle don't really matter at all because it's going to be a few turns before the next battle and they'll all regenerate back to life before then, so in this case it would be fine to take a Pyrrhic victory even. Don't do what I did here if you want to be optimal for in-game growth, that's what I wanted to say. But in real time, what I did is way faster and doesn't break the flow state of the campaign gameplay, which I really value. I'm facing trouble in the east, as the faction I declared war on, unbeknownst to me, had a stack of trash standing around in my territory over there. Whoops, I guess, didn't think they had it in them. What I'm gonna do is ignore them, because while I do have a spare army I can use to kill them, I would rather use it to attack one of their settlements. Even if the enemy take my local settlement, they won't have the economy to stop me taking it back one day, and trading 1-for-1 in settlements is fine for now. I thought we could move on, but it's actually now time for the next bells and whistles highlight, which is ancient legacies and lawmaking. You pick a so-called ancient legacy, which is a choice for a new bell and or whistle. They really went all out with this game. There are so many bells and whistles that the bells and whistles have become non-linear. I went with lawmaking, so now I get to use a lawmaking mechanic. This is a system where you kind of level up your lawmaking ability to make stronger and stronger laws. Laws being passive buffs of the usual kind. Basically, it's like being able to define a custom technology effect and then pay for it. That's the easiest way of putting it. And it's also a way of putting it that highlights why I didn't use this mechanic very much. At first, the laws you can make are very unhelpful. It's like, get +4 attack for light axe squads if it rains on a Tuesday, like really weak tech effects. To unlock the ability to add useful clauses to your laws, such as replenishment of all units or something, you pay a currency called Kuduru, a currency which isn't shown in the main UI, you might see it here and there somewhere. Makes me think they added this later on in the planning stages when they thought, you know what, there aren't enough bells and whistles, let's put some more stuff in the background. Kuduru is a currency you primarily earn by clicking this button that gives you Kuduru once per turn. Like you're a rat, which presses a button to give you food in some sort of psychological conditioning experiment. I'll show you that button later, I guess, because it's a bell and or whistle unto itself. The problem is that Kuduru currency is also used for a third bell and whistle, one of the OG bells and whistles, the tech tree. Yet while this lawmaking system is essentially custom tech making, it's ultra cool and like a massively good idea for the franchise because the same currency you use for it can also just buy regular techs, which are better and don't come with all the limitations. You might as well do that, especially because Kuduru allows you to buy endgame techs. You don't have to go through the tech tree, you can just buy any tech with it. And that's what I focused on. Like, I wanted to get those endgame, everything is buffed all the time type techs, so I'm forced to avoid buying +4 attack for light hag squads on a rainy Tuesday. I mainly spent all my Kuduru on techs, basically. Especially because Babylon had an endgame tech which gives you loads of extra resources for controlling river ports, and you end up having loads of those, so that was a good one. And just all of the ones that upgrade units generically and across the board. The point is, I did not use the lawmaking system very much, but I think if the campaign had lasted a lot longer, and it had more currency to spend, then I might as well have been using it. One thing the law system has going for it, I'll say this, is that I presume the AI can't use this mechanic. It's like too complicated, they probably wouldn't want to program an AI for it. So the player can get this late game advantage where like you research all your techs, so does the AI, but then you have another tech tree that you build and is unique to you, giving you that player-only advantage, as I put it. Player-only advantages is a topic that comes up a lot in the world of Total War Pharaoh Dynasties bells and whistles. There's more to get into there philosophically, however, let's actually move on for now. Actually, one more little note. We see a cutscene here about a pharaoh dying, and I thought this was a glitch in the original Total War Pharaoh. Apparently not. You get to see the cutscenes for what happens to other factions, or the other main factions at least. Mainly, that's going to be their ruler dying, or them entering a civil war. I guess it's meant to be a big deal, so it puts this up in your face all of a sudden. But we'll never interact with those distant main factions in this campaign. So yeah, it just comes across as weird. They are nice scenes, I watched some of them, but there's plenty of room for confusion, because you might assume it's talking about your faction when it suddenly announces, like, brother is turning against brother, or your ruler's died or something. Never mind that for now. That city I besieged earlier to start this recent war of mine ends up sallying out with reinforcements, so let's settle it with this battle. We'll be doing the usual thing, defending the line and working the flanks, with the AI also trying to outflank me on the left, which was good to see. While that happens, I will mention the main change that was made to how combat works, while of course showing you nothing to indicate this, and perhaps that itself is going to be my point this time. There is a new combat mechanic called lethality, which is essentially critical hits. Blows have a chance to kill enemies. What do you mean blows have a chance to kill enemies, you ask? Like, isn't that the point of attacking in video games? It didn't have a chance before? Well, normally, your soldiers have health, and a lot of it, and they can deal with a large number of blows, and where have I heard that before? I think that sucks, blah blah blah, and I don't think that the Rome 2 onwards focus on health was very good. I think tweaking chance to inflict a blow is the way you get the mechanical effect of health, what they're doing here, like allowing combats to go on for a longer time, or something. I'm not quite sure what they're going for with it. And you don't necessarily need to introduce any hand-wavy concepts like hit points here to achieve something mechanically similar. I put it to you, I claim. Well, now we've got lethality, which ignores hit points. That might sound like, I would think it's good then, doesn't it? Well, no, because it's yet another thing that obfuscates combat. No better word than obfuscates, unfortunately. I mean, it separates the results of combat from the player, because you can't foresee combat results, or link them to your actions even, until you get a vast amount of experience, until you build a mental heuristic, to go back to using annoying language that unfortunately is the best word for it. I hate myself, but not as much as I hate the stats system in the Rome 2 onwards Total War games. What stats system, you ask? Yes, I have it turned off for all my battle footage. But normally, when you have a unit selected, it gives you a window with like 20 stats, and if you mouse over those stats, it breaks them down into sub-stats, and they're all numbers from 1 to 100, and somewhere there is this cosmic dance going on between health, armor damage, armor piercing damage, attack chance, defense chance, stamina, and hidden stats like attack speed, melee range, animation iframes, and a whole load more. The game will use that to determine what units are better than others in combat. It's like quantum chess, and Total War Pharaoh brings two new numbers to the field. Armor health, different to armor and health, and lethality, damage which ignores armor, but isn't armor-piercing damage. I'm not even going to talk about armor health. It's some kind of debuff on your armor based on how much fighting has happened, which Total War Attila also had secretly because armor was debuffed by stamina usage in that game, so fighting made your armor weaker. Heartwarming, the worst Total War game you know has an infuriating mechanic. Not infuriating because it's a bad idea or anything, I like what they're trying to do there, just because it's being grafted on to the most insane combat calculations of all time, not pictured here, that's the problem. I'm already at my limit with, like, Age of Empires, where it's got attack defense and pierce defense, and it's already too much for the UI and too beginner unfriendly, but it is enough to do balancing and have complex metas and such with only 4 or 5 numbers. Well, let's just sum up here. I don't really know what impact the new lethality mechanic has, because you can't see the numbers, there's no feedback when it triggers, and I never thought about it while playing. This is the same for all the other stats involved, and as far as I know, like, adding another one just made it worse. I want them to finesse it down to the fewest stats, because that gives the player the most strategy, the most interaction with combat mathematically. My stopgap solution is what you saw back there. I don't know any of the stats, I'm not familiar with any of the units, I just know how to play Total War. I can do Hammer and Anvil. Like, all the games are designed to make you win if you do Hammer and Anvil, because what else can they do? That's the only available gameplay at this stage, so they have to make that the way to progress. But yes, my CPU is having fun simulating thousands of interactions between equations down there in the mud. And I'm forced to ask, why? So that's my little rant there. Like, I would like to hear, though, some pro Total War stats points if anyone has some. Like, are there people who have been enriched by going through the numbers and getting to grips with what they do and having new thoughts because of it? Does it improve your gameplay performance over my vague approach that I'm showcasing here? If the game went full Magic the Gathering and just gave all units like a power and toughness rating, like 2 stats between 1 and 10, would that make the gameplay actually any different? And would something be gained in players grasping and using those numbers to do strategy in mathematical detail? That's what I'm wondering. We're now in the battle for the other enemy settlement I went after with my second army, and this is one of the battles I actually remember from this campaign. This is an example of a battle with some stakes and some involved gameplay too, so I like it. The stakes being that I really need to win to make my plan of not defending be at least a neutral trade. And the gameplay focus comes from my attempt to do a sweeping flank attack with my hidden hordes of farmers. Lots of factions can recruit farmers, and they serve as the standard, surprisingly good trash unit that Total War likes to add. Surprisingly good in that they cost half as much as like the first real units you can get, but they're not half as good, they're better than that. And with the AI's difficulty cheats, they're straight up good because those cheats disproportionately buff weaker units, so the weakest units change the most. Does the game tell you that? No. How do I know it then? It came to me in a dream. It's maths again, because like the cheats are flat increases. So stuff with the lowest stats to begin with improve proportionally the most, and then they are more likely to pass statistical breakpoints such as morale and stamina categories. Let's not even bring statistical breakpoints into the infinite maelstrom of stat analysis. All farmers, except the ones from Babylon, except ours, are Terminators in disguise, and we'll see that later on. Anyway, I had my hidden, pitiful base stat farmers hidden in some long grass earlier, and I didn't place my main formation in the ideal place to use that ambush I set up, meaning I had to run a long way to get my farmers to actually attack something from the back and get the wave in there. I think the reason I did that was I wanted to have the main fight take place on a small hill, because in theory you get higher stats the higher on the map you are. Although from my experience, it's not true in all Total War games, and sometimes it was like patched in and out over time whether that was true, and the actual effect, like what the number change is, that's just going to be another unknown to throw into our already unknown combat calculations. So, probably should just forget about that and draw the enemy to be beside the farmers. That would have been a better move for this battle. Another cautionary tale for you. We also brought out a ranged unit flank attack for this battle, an underrated Total War strategy because it inflicts damage without inflicting a morale shock, which might sound bad, but it means you kill more enemies before they rout. And that does matter in a settlement sally like this, as there will be a second battle afterwards to decide the settlement assault. You need to avoid enemies routing here to get the best result for that. There is the eternal question also of whether you are intended to play the rout phase of Total War battles. I think you shouldn't have to, but my paranoia tells me that I do. That means after the battle you need to run all the enemies off the field, because if you leave the battle when the game first prompts you to do so, it will leave all enemies still engaged alive afterwards. Some Total War games basically run an auto-resolve at the end to simulate you attacking the routing army. And others don't. I genuinely don't know which side Total War Pharaoh falls on, but I know one side is much nicer to have than the other. You can hit the speed up button if your PC is good, and that will take the edge off the more boring, chase gameplay at the end of each battle at least. Anyway, I thought that was a good battle, with a strong butterfly effect. It's going to impact the campaign, this one. Another side point to make is that I didn't have that many units, and I think that's also the secret to a good Total War battle. If you watch someone play a massive Total War battle, they play it as if they had fewer units. As in, they'll just take a group of 5 units and give them the same order, just use them as a block together. We'll talk about that later if I feel like it. That's a whole thing as well, the number of units making a big difference to the gameplay feel. But yes, that was a nice example of an important early game battle. The stronger you get in the campaign, the less individual battles matter because you can bounce back from anything. You have infinite troops and tons of resources. Losing a battle means you get more resources because you stop paying for the army, so you just bounce back immediately. I like it though in this early game where you have these turning point battles where you're employing absolutely everything you can, and victory or defeat makes a real difference to the trajectory of the campaign from here on. I think there's something to be said for redesigning the game such that battles are always decisive and uncommon. You want your battles to all be turning points, which would also give the game a more historically authentic twist, I think, as well. The way to do that might be as simple as having limited manpower or disabling regeneration, a suggestion that's been floating around since the Rome 2 days. I don't even want to talk about it right now because I've thought about that a lot in the past and I'm just burnt out on that idea and trying to make the battles epic again in some way. We end up taking both of the enemy's settlements, but their army out in the east has one of mine under siege, so this war isn't over yet. And now here's a brief look at the tech tree I kept mentioning earlier. Loads of passive buffs, some situational, some general. I would say that compared to other Total War games, the technologies aren't very important in this one, which I guess makes sense because we're not leaving the Bronze Age anytime soon. Generally, techs that give you replenishment and movement range matter above all else, but there wasn't much of that on offer here. It's going to be 5% better resource generation from a certain building or something, temples build 1 turn faster, just little things. Where's my fire by rank unlock, eh? You could actually throw in gameplay changes to the tech tree though, with formations or changing army limits or something. However, that would be too good. Something mechanical should originate from this screen, that's all I'll say, I guess. If you know me well, you can rest assured that if prodded, I would happily invent 10 hours of ideas on what I mean specifically by that, but I'm in my mercy era, so let's just keep moving on. Next, I want to look at this defense of Uruk, the eastern town I left to the enemy. I thought that this defense would be quite possible, as it's just a stack of pure trash. I have some real units, and the enemy's numbers might not matter too much because of the map. We'll have buildings on our flanks all over the place, so the farmers might end up queuing to join a losing battle. There were 2 things standing in my way, both of which aren't immediately obvious. First is the stuff I mentioned, where the enemy farmers have extra stats, probably morale and melee attack, if I were to guess, which means that quickly routing their trash, especially while focusing on fighting frontally to protect my flanks, is going to be difficult, or more difficult than usual. My units can still beat theirs, just slowly, and that speed is the key because of the second problem, the capture points. There was a lesson I very vaguely remember learning in Total War Pharaoh, but by now had completely forgotten again. In settlement defense battles in this game, you have to hold all the capture points for the whole battle. In most other Total War games, there is a main capture point you hold to avoid losing, and then sometimes others that provide buffs to units. Or in the case of Total War Attila, to say they provide buffs to units and then actually don't, because if you're playing Total War Attila, you don't deserve nice things. I think the points in that game provided a buff only on the capture point, whereas the text implied it was for the whole battlefield. Some problem like that existed. Anyway, in Total War Pharaoh, if you don't hold one of the capture points in a town, a surprisingly invisible timer begins to tick down. Surprising because of how enormously important this timer is. In short, you get a cumulative debuff to all your units' morale that ticks up every 20 seconds or so when you don't control all the capture points. I, as you probably noticed, had dedicated myself to only holding one of the points, assuming that such doom timers would only begin if I lost them both. What this means is that while this battle was kind of working for us for a while, and tactically I was having fun moving around and trying to work out how I could get rid of all these farmers, an achievable goal I think, I ended up getting confused as to why my units started wavering, then realised what was going on. There's a soft time limit. In the past it would have been a hard time limit, and I think I prefer it being soft, where have I heard that before, because you can theoretically play around it a bit, but not in this case. We're screwed. I gave the enemy that capture point as early as possible essentially, I just ignored it, so we're effectively kicked out of the battle as early as possible. And that's a bit of a shame, because not only was I having fun with the battle, but losing this settlement on a technicality, after already facing the annoyance of having to fight a no territory 20 units of spammed farmers enemy. I don't know, it just doesn't feel that good. The way it works, by the way, this no territory fighting, is that when a faction loses everything, their armies will stay alive for a while and lose 10% of their men per turn. But because they're never more than 2 turns away from a settlement, there is a decent chance the faction will rebuild itself. Or they'll run around in circles, raiding infinitely until the player uninstalls the game, that sort of thing. We might see a bit of that later. All I will say is that please have that debuff timer on the main UI. It's more important than most of the other stuff you've put on the UI. There's no reason to hide that in a tooltip. And that was the end of that then. I made my bed, I lay in it, it wasn't very comfy. Someone else got into the bed and gradually pushed me a little further towards the edge every 24 seconds. I didn't really realise that for a while. It's the Total War Pharaoh Dynasties sleep paralysis demon at it again, and the long and short is I wasn't really happy with how that went, but we can probably come back later for revenge. Before such things can be attempted, I was distracted in the west, because I needed to attack some other random faction to complete the province I started taking by going to war with the previously discussed random faction. And it seems like this is the time to get into a little faction rant. We are surrounded by a large number of de facto nameless factions, nameless in that I didn't read their names before killing them. The game has lots of factions, over 100 I think, and I found it very hard to engage with all these different guys since they're so interchangeable. In Babylon you are surrounded by factions who have the same units and buildings as you, and then you push out and face the Elamites or something, and they'll have almost the same units and buildings as you because there isn't that much difference between the factions in the game overall. And while technically the factions have little traits that affect their behavior or their AI, it doesn't do anything in practice. To put it another way, it doesn't matter what or who the faction is when they're staring at a 49% rating on the balance bar and hence will be deleted from reality. It all ends up the same. And that's really the only mechanical interaction you're going to have with the majority of entities in the world. What I'm getting at here is that having millions of copy-paste factions filling out the map might not be the right move. I'm imagining an approach where you have your 10 main factions, the Imperial factions, who are the contenders. They are playing the game. They can win. And then there are another 90 factions, which are the chaff. And I think the chaff factions should be mechanically different. Take city-states in Civilization as a reference, perhaps. I think the minor factions around you should have totally different approaches to diplomacy. They probably shouldn't field armies outside of their lands, and are kind of just there to vassalize. They would require casus belli to attack. They can align with you. You can get their resources if they like you, or you complete quests, or you're strong or rich. And the focus of the game would be more about you versus the other contenders. You're both trying to win chaff factions over to your side or find ways to annex them. This is more realistic, I think, and might help give fewer, more decisive and epic battles as I wanted earlier. I don't really know, like something. Once again, I'm asking for something here. I want to not auto-resolve 5 name-swapped Akkadian-type factions who might as well have been the same faction mechanically. I think what this Babylon campaign wants to be is a long and epic war with the Assyrians, where we're battling for influence over the 50 cities of Mesopotamia. And the petty kingdoms only come into play as vassals and auxiliaries. The bells and whistles of the game would pertain to managing the politics and economics of whatever that is, and be less about the gamey side, less like 15% missile deflect chance for soldiers between 5.5 and 5.8 if there's a full moon, and more like, well, you have to send an army to secure the rule of some minor ruler in exchange for 25 years of military support, and if you annex a territory instead, this would be outrageous and come with downsides, but maybe it is still viable, and actually attacking the enemy's heartland is logistically or militarily really difficult. So your rise to power is about gathering the lands under your banner to form an empire, and then entering into a contest of empires phase of the campaign, where you head out to meet the other cultures that have achieved the same thing. Well, I am just inventing something like Imperator Rome, that Paradox game, aren't I? Only it's Total War. Perhaps it's a lot to ask to be basically asking for a fundamental change to the game rules, one that actually might, ironically, take it back to feel more like the original Rome Total War, where it was mainly a contest between the major factions, the minor factions didn't do very much, and you were likely to fight a lot of the major factions during your campaign. Then again, is it so much to ask in a series that's had so many sequels without changing the game? Like, just try it, please. Like, make all of the minor factions play a different game. You could color code them by their role, like in Civ or something. Declare Total War on the Total War formula, because the gradual map painting against all of these nobodies doesn't really make for the best campaign possible on a massive map filled with different cultures and unit types that we'll just never see. A small map would be fine, a countryside full of chaff locations you can conquer without even going to, that's fine. Massive build up to a single battle with your rival empire that massively cripples them if you win, that's fine. Simplification might be the answer, if only to allow you to focus on the cool stuff. And again, I am hand-waving quite a lot here. I'm hand-waving legions of specific mechanical points away, but the foundational point we've got time to make here is just the campaign map needs new gameplay. The formula needs to change, and changing factions to be either contenders or not, with different mechanical roles and different rules in the game, might be the gateway to whatever I am imagining here. It would even be a change so large it could justify renaming and re-releasing your game, eh? Like, you could call it Dynasties Mode, this thing I'm imagining. It could be a DLC. Call it Total War Pharaoh Extreme Legends. Change everything. Make it like Crescent 2 on the PS2. I don't know, there are options. I have no idea who I'm out here killing in Mesopotamia right now, and I wish I didn't have to do it so many times, or click the button that makes it happen so many times to be specific. I broke down again, it was inevitable. Back to the gameplay. We accidentally slipped into one of the more epic fights where I was battling frantically to all sides after being taken by surprise by the enemy's reinforcement directions. I had to rotate my formation quickly in the beginning, handily onto a hill facing the enemy's new blob, withdrawing the force I had left to ambush in that direction, because I thought the blob was only going to be a couple of units. We took a load of damage in that retreat, and other units meanwhile were charging around on the other side of that hill, trying to stop the enemy's main force, what I thought was going to be the main force, from intervening with this new battle. This was okay because they had lots of skirmishing units over there without much infantry protection, so charging at them gave me some nice fights or just forced them to run away. I ended up with chariots and other stuff behind the enemy's main position back on the hill, and started clearing everything up. Then it was a case of going around and resolving the mess all over the place, bit by bit, a process that of course speeds up rapidly towards the end. A really good battle overall, perhaps the best one of the campaign, although I do get snubbed with a close victory rating at the end. It wasn't that close. We lost 25% of our men, although that is revised down to 15% with post-battle replenishment. One factor that may still affect the rating is a possible glitch, possible feature, where the rating takes into account ammunition losses. A ranged unit with no ammo adds fewer points to your power level for balance bar purposes, so if you shoot a load of enemies, your power level is also dropping at the same time. This power is restored immediately after the battle, as ammo is infinite at the strategic level. However, I think the battle rating treats your final state as if it's permanent. But yes, all the ammo actually came back, half the dead came back immediately, and the rest will be back next turn, so we're not going to have lost anything in retrospect. This was a decisive victory in this war. What even is this war, you might ask? That's a good question. I remember not wanting to go west, which is where these enemies are from, so it must have been that this nameless faction from the west just attacked me, perhaps explaining why they had an army walking around in my lands. Going east would be ideal for me here because we can clear up the corner of the map and then go west stronger later. However, there's another issue. That stack of 20 farmer squads from earlier is still at large, and they were able to come and take the place I made a big hurrah about taking from them earlier with that gambit. Meaning, I've now lost both settlements on the table in that gambit, and I haven't killed their army. This actually sucks. Such is the power of a 20 stack of farmers. Like, good play from the AI, that's gotta be said, but it's also pretty damn annoying. I can at least get revenge, because the army I sent to Uruk has now arrived. We take that place back with a Cadmean auto-resolve, aka one that was very close, but I couldn't be bothered to fight to avoid massive losses. I mentioned earlier this doesn't really matter, and this is such a case. This whole situation with the nameless green faction was probably uninteresting to me by this stage, because I would have felt that I'd beaten them already, and this was just like some jank happening at the end of the war. This could be a me problem, because it's also cool that they can come back like this and reclaim their lands. I would love to be playing as them in this situation. But also, I can't even with this. Like, it's also really annoying. I did feel bad about it. It's a thing where a determined AI can resist being finished off for a very long time. And while that makes sense, it feels off because our war with them is so unepic and inconsequential. It's like, well, stop doing epic and consequential things. Like, I know this isn't going anywhere. You're leading me on, nameless green faction. As in, if a major faction with a known character and known objectives and they could win and stuff was doing this to me, with a real army perhaps that wasn't all farmers, that would be nice. This would feel more like a dramatic trading of blows. But here, I know I'm going to auto-resolve them all to death eventually. They can't actually stop me, but they can slow me down and refuse all diplomacy in the meantime. Again, this could be a me problem. I could cast this as being epic and cool in my head if I wanted, but I'm just too jaded and worn down. I just see it as them stopping me from getting to some mythical good part of the game by just making me do the same thing over and over again. But this might be the good part. This is some actual decent strategic play going on right now with these guys. Nameless Green Faction has main character syndrome, and while I'm mad about it, you've also got to respect it. Part of the problem is that the way Total War factions are balanced is usually they have a base income detached from their territory, which makes small factions with no income still pretty good. Like a faction with 4 cities versus 1 city isn't 4 times richer, they're 1.25 times richer, so our growing empire actually does struggle to fight a village and 20 farmer brigades because your base income can support 20 units, whereas getting a settlement only increases that by 2 or 3. Or worse than that in practice, because some settlements don't increase your military relevant income at all, like if they make stone or something like that. Or taking a settlement can decrease your income, because the game gives you various penalties based on your empire's size. Yes, it's the legendary game design feature, a negative feedback loop. So it is possible to become weaker by expanding your empire if the things you expand into happen to have certain traits. We'll look at that later when it's a bigger deal. Cope, cope, cope. Who can rid me of these meddlesome farmers? While I prepare to attack them once again and they prepare to attack me once again, let's look at something I find quite good and quite interesting about Total War's campaign design after all of my rants against it earlier: the economy. The majority of your time on the campaign map is spent fiddling with the economy. It's pretty simple in that you're looking to make combinations of buildings with synergies, like you put the makes more food building in a province that has a lot of natural food generation already. And that's about it really. There's not all that much to it, and I've seen people criticize it for being childish, essentially, because it's very much like the put a square in a square hole type of decision making that strategy games are meant to be not about. This is the place where you don't have that kind of gameplay. However, I will once again turn around and compliment what we have here, because it's better than all the other Rome 2-like Total War games. There are more buildings, a couple more synergies, and more specialization. You can even make an economy that focuses on passively generating experience for your army units if you want to not play the game, for example. The actual thing I like about it, though, is how it's tied to the large number of different resources you manage. This automatically opens up options that the pre-Total War Troy campaigns could never have, so this economy can go deeper. Again, it's not especially deep, but it's deeper. It's not that good, but it's better. Like, that's my official take, which I think I explained somewhere in my other Total War Pharaoh video a long time ago. Just pointing it out here again for the record. I had a calm and peaceful time managing the economy, and basically just buying every upgrade as soon as it became available. Like, that's the only strategy. Getting the basic synergies. If I ever couldn't afford something, I just went to the diplomacy screen and traded resources until I could. They did a marvellous job with the diplomacy screen's economic considerations. I'm not even going to bother showing it. It's really easy to buy things off other factions, which makes doing your economy really easy. It's all good. I think it's another player-only advantage, in that the player can detect that having stone is way more valuable than everything else, all the other resources, so you just constantly trade for it. Most of the useful upgrades you can get require stone, and you always need more of it, and you can happily trade food for stone, because you get loads of food every time you win a battle. You'll win more battles if you buy the things that stone buys, and you can also trade bronze in the early game, as bronze is mainly for upkeeping your premium units you generally don't have in the beginning, or even really need if you want to be facetious about it. The AI probably doesn't take any of this into account, so I was always like bending people over barrels, and when I was done with that, I'd play some Total War Pharaoh Dynasties with a rapidly upgrading economy thanks to unequal treaties with all of the loser stone-producing factions. There's one more thing I really like about managing the economy, and it's something a little unexpected. The music. The music in Total War Pharaoh and Total War Troy is extremely chilled out. It's just like space music. The whole campaign is presented with this dreamlike aesthetic that probably doesn't come through just looking at it. I think Total War Troy actually did it better, with all of its mythical art integrated into the UI and the fog of war. Anyway, I happen to be a massive fan of droning ambient music. It's no exaggeration to say I listen to it every day for quite a long time. So I happen to be really into the vibe of the campaign map in this game. Does that go a long way to me ignoring any possible issues with the campaign gameplay? Absolutely, it's just magic. It does legitimately add to this nothing matters feel of the game, the unepic feel I talked about. Like, you have infinite armies, basically infinite resources, a featureless map with no geographical strategy to be had, 25 copy-pasted factions to kill, an invisible population, no signs of life in your empire. That's a big aesthetic issue, I think. It's all just like a dream. You've put the square in a square hole. You know, go and do it, go on, do it. Put it in the square hole. Oh, well done. You did it. You get 5% extra food in that town whose name you never bothered to read. Well done. You're the best. You did it. You're the king of the universe. We're all very proud of you. And everything is still very calm. And basically, in the next 2 games I'm going to cover, I'm going to contrast this visible economy activity standpoint and use it against the likes of Total War Pharaoh. This, what we're seeing here, does suck. But as it sucks, it's very relaxing, and I could not for the life of me tell you where I have heard that before. Now, here's another actual point. Back to diplomacy for this one. The usual alliance skip exploit is back. There's this pseudo glitch where alliances are ignored if a declaration of war is made via the join war feature in the diplomacy screen, which operates under different rules to the declare war feature. So if I want to take some little random patch to even out my provinces, but that patch is allied to someone, all we need is for that alliance to already have an enemy, which in my experience, it just will. The AI is always at war with someone, even if they're not doing anything about it. You go and find that someone, and then ask for them to pay you to join their war. Then you're in the war, the alliances aren't invoked, and you can conquer your target with no diplomatic repercussions. I believe I was able to do this to dodge all alliances during this campaign. And I also believe that at some point in the past, Total War stopped you from being able to do this in the progression through the franchise, but now it's back, it seems. It makes alliances into a de facto player-only advantage, as only in rare circumstances will an AI's alliance make you think twice about just pursuing the most convenient map-painting trajectory. You can always get around alliances, it seems. Now, remember that thing where I was talking about how I wanted the campaign to be an epic war with Assyria, the other main faction? Here's me vassalizing them with no other contact whatsoever. Is that even allowed? Like, I don't know, they're really up for this. Devin from the future here, this footage is actually me becoming adopted into their family. I don't even know what that really means, but in a couple of turns in the footage, they're my vassal. At some point they became my vassal around this time, and that's what I vaguely remembered. So let's just put up with me talking as if they're already my vassal now, while they're not. Carry on past Devin. The faction leader of Assyria is the leader of the Mesopotamian court. He is the guy with the actual title of King of the Universe. He's my boss in the implied but mechanically completely dissonant politics system of the game. Like, yes, I actually serve under a different faction, but this has no meaning whatsoever mechanically. We'll talk about that another time in the next part, in fact. Somehow, I can become the king of the guy that is my king through the vassal system. So now, I am King of Kings of the Universe, technically. How about that? So yes, we gained the only other main faction in our region of the map as a vassal. And this is actually a problem because having a vassal mainly means they will do stupid things and start wars that you end up having to be part of. But I guess that spices things up. Like, in theory, they give you money. I don't know how much, but just killing them probably gives you more money and less jank, especially because only factions weak enough that it's trivially easy to kill them will agree to being your vassal. So really there's no reason to get a vassal. I'm going to do it anyway though. This is another cautionary tale. Don't do this for more than a handful of turns at least to get extra cash while you move towards them, to kill them and get the rest of the cash. I'm a wise and generous King of Kings of the Universe. You could pay me not to kill you, but I still might. That's the kind of universe I want to build. Now, to close out this part, let's conclude the story of the roaming farmers. What they did was move back over towards Uruk to take it once again. In the meantime, I had retaken the other place we were fighting over to the west, so they're back as a no-region faction. However, I won't be able to stop them from taking Uruk until I realised that maybe I can ask them not to attack it. And indeed, I can do that. I've got a peace treaty with them, which is tantamount to killing them in this case, because they are experiencing that 10% per turn desertion for having no territory, meaning that in peace, they will just have to declare war on someone else now, and go fight a harder battle later, which they'll probably lose, or they can just die off eventually in the background. I don't know which one it was in the end, because I wasn't paying attention, of course. However, the drama is over, and I strongly suspect I could have got that peace deal the moment they became a no-territory faction, and skipped the drama entirely. I guess the actual point to make here is that the AI needed a way to detect that the peace treaty was lethal to them. They needed to take Uruk and then ask me for peace. That would be their play here, and I might even have agreed, because Uruk isn't in any of my provinces. It would be neat for me to come and conquer this place later on and they can have it for now. That would be fine. Well, you win some, you lose some. The King of Kings of the Universe will mercifully sheath his sword, but only because he wants to watch you wither at his feet as he refuses to help. It's a wonderful universe with wonderful Kings of Kings, and what I'll do is leave this wonderful video right here. There are a bunch more things I wanted to soapbox on in Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. We've got the auto-resolve rant, the naval transportation rant, the outpost rant featuring the AI algorithm mathematics rant. That promises to be a topic. I don't even know what these notes are talking about, but it's gonna be something great. And there are like 3 more bells and whistles screens to discuss as well. And we'll even look more at the campaign developments, including an actual large-scale war that presented issues for me, and more antics from wild, dead faction, stacks of melting trash, I think, as well. So things will trundle on in the next and hopefully final part of this complete campaign commentary. Part Euphrates is over, part Tigris coming up next.